Good evening. Welcome to Uncivil Disobedience. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me as always, is my co-host and partner in crime, Kennedy Cooper. How are you doing tonight, Kennedy?
I'm all right. Eating good today. My partner works at a restaurant, and they had a lobster tail special that ended today. So you know what that means? We have a
I saw the
fridge.
leftovers, yes.
Yeah, a fridge full of goodies, including some lobster tail. And
I love it.
when you don't get to enjoy things like that all the time, it sure is nice to find little ways to get a treat in this world once in a while.
It never hurts.
Serving food to rich people is one way to eat nice food.
It's true. It's true. I can't deny that. It's
Yeah.
just like um, if you wanna drive nice cars, become a chauffeur.
Yeah. Honestly, you'll drive the newest cars all the time. Constant trade ups. If you work for
Oh yeah,
you work for a legit company, you'll always be brand new car every year.
it's true. It's very true. Unless a tornado hits it, then you might have to get one sooner.
Well, yeah.
Tornadoes appear to be a big risk lately.
Could be a bit of an issue, especially if you're heading into holiday season. You're counting on that car
Yeah,
to deliver your Christmas presents.
yeah, exactly.
This tornado stuff in Kentucky, it really is awful. At least 60 people dead.
Well, now that's a total of several different states, but yes, it's really
No,
awful.
that's at least 60 in just Kentucky now.
Are they saying that
Yeah.
now? Just
hmm
Kentucky?
Yeah.
Morning, that was the sixth state total.
No, that was I saw this total actually about I want to say 2-3 hours ago, and it was
Gotcha.
Kentucky. Kentucky alone has passed 60 dead, which is a lot for tornadoes,
Yeah,
especially at this point in time because we know what tornadoes are. We're relatively prepared for them. They tend to do a fair bit of property damage, but the total casualties in tornadoes is usually really low in the modern era. Even if it's a somewhat destructive tornado, like a lot of times, even a very destructive tornado kills like one person. That's like a very common headline.
yeah.
Truly, you have to assume that unusual circumstances were in play for this many people to die during a tornado.
Well, I mean, for instance, that the one of the big issues was that it actually stayed on the ground for 2 hours.
2 solid hours, yeah.
That's not something tornadoes normally do.
No, that's not an everyday occurrence. It was also a very large tornado. It was much, much larger than we're used to, especially in that part of the country. Like, Kentucky doesn't usually have tornadoes that big. Kentucky is not especially flat. It has flat areas, but it's pretty hilly,
Yeah,
and with some small mountains and things. And so, with a bumpy landscape like that, you're usually a lot safer.
true.
If you live in Kansas, especially on the flat half of Kansas, that's that's danger country for tornadoes. That's where a tornado, if you see a tornado, even if it's, zillions of miles away, you got to get to shelter immediately because it could be on you in no time.
That's
Um,
that's where a famous children's author thought it was entirely legitimate for a tornado to pick a house up and carry it to a fantasy land.
yep. Yep. And to this day, I mean, that part of that story holds up. I don't think
Yes,
I've never heard anyone question that part of the narrative. Like, yes, that was a bit too much. Like, no, that was one of the tamest parts of the fantasy story, and it felt, like mildly believable in this way that
hey,
took you from reality to fantasy.
the
Uh,
the tornado scenes in the Wizard of Oz in the movie still hold up. I
yeah,
mean, it's
well
it's
done stuff.
corny because of the old special effects, but it still holds up as, yeah, this is convincing tornado stuff.
Yeah. So, um, flatter parts of the country that have the conditions for tornadoes is where you would think of this kind of destruction usually. Kentucky is
Usually,
not. Growing up in that part of the country, because I lived a tiny bit of my youth in Kentucky and then a fair bit in Ohio and just a lot of the Appalachian area.
so you
Uh,
know Ohio isn't a myth, and you've been deceiving people willfully.
or I'm lying.
Well, you're lying either way.
So, growing up in that part of the country, we would have tornado warnings occasionally, but everyone would just kind of be like, yeah, let's all get in the basement or whatever, but it's going to be fine realistically. Like, everyone's attitude was like, that I was around anyway, was generally like, we do take this seriously when the tornado warnings come, but also we know in our heads that realistically these tornadoes are going to break up on the hills and it's
Well,
all going to disperse. And so the fact that this tornado even did this, lasted this long, was this big, and existed in a place where you wouldn't normally have this kind of destruction from tornadoes, all pretty strange on its own. And of course, we know that climate change is the cause, most likely.
oh yeah, almost certainly. And I will go ahead and throw in a little dig at capitalism here. Normally, when the storm warnings start, people get in the basement, and there's time for people to get in the basement from the time they know that a tornado is headed towards them to the time that they're actually hit. And a big part of the problem this time around is that, well, no one was allowed to go to the basement until it was too late at the Amazon in Illinois. And they just kept working. No one was allowed to go to the shelters at the factory in Kentucky. So there's 14 deaths right there that were completely preventable if people had gone to shelters in time.
At least 14, because at this point, the rescue crews are saying there's probably no one left alive in there.
Yeah.
So that means that pretty quickly that number is going to go even further up as we turn all those missing people over into deceased. And that's
Yeah.
really tragic and horrible to say, that this happened for basically no reason. But Amazon's heading into the holiday season, and so they pushed and pushed, made people work. And there were, although it wasn't very many, because most people had the sense to not do this, there were a couple of other businesses that refused to close, that also led to some deaths. And it's not as notable as Amazon, but I think it's worth highlighting that happened, still too, just because when Amazon sets a precedent and gets away with shit, then smaller businesses are going to try some of it over time. And so there were other people that thought, well, Amazon's factory is staying open in a tornado, we'll stay open in the tornado. And some of those people were killed. So there's absolutely, this is completely senseless. People talk about the working conditions of workers in other countries. We need to stop thinking about other countries and think about the conditions of workers here. For a factory to be destroyed by a tornado, killing maybe up to 100 workers, we won't know for sure for a few days. But now that the rescue workers are saying, hey, it's basically over, well, it's basically over. That's as bad as it gets. Like, you got to know this if you're watching this and you wonder about, this stuff. There's nowhere in the world where the working conditions are much worse than that outside of like an emerald mine.
That's true. Or a gold mine, a couple of other places.
Yeah, you'd have to go to mines or some of the riskier jobs at sea, some shit like that. But yeah, if conditions here are that bad, that means conditions here for workers are basically as bad as it gets, at least on some levels.
And isn't that a cheerful thought? America, as bad as it gets for workers. When you consider that I work for a living and so do you.
Yeah. I don't know how to not be pessimistic about it. It seems like to me it's kind of unbelievable that this happened, even in the context of the things that I believe about capitalism, which are harsh and many people would say unfair in this country. Like when I bring up my views, a lot of people think I'm too critical of the system, right? Well, if I'm too critical of the system, there's we all got to change, because
No.
apparently I'm not critical enough.
Who told you that?
Well, I'm saying that I don't think, like I said, I didn't think that I would wake up to news like this
That's a
anytime
good point.
soon. I didn't think it was impossible. I'm not saying like outside of my lifetime type of shit, but I'm just saying, if you had asked me before this happened, you think there will be a factory disaster in America that kills like 50, 100, 200 people in the next couple of years? I'd say, woo, I don't know. I think things would have to get worse.
Yeah.
I think things would have to degrade more. Well, I was wrong. Okay. And I've worked some horrible jobs, so I ought to know better. Worked some dangerous jobs. But I still kind of wanted to believe that things were a little better than that. They aren't.
The,
So that's where it's at.
the scary part is how few of the actual people there working at the Amazon plant were Amazon employees. Most of them were contractors of various kinds.
Well, and that's important too, because what do we know about contractors? They get less benefits. What does that include? Death benefits. So now the families
Yep.
of some of those contractors that may be fighting with Amazon for years to try to get fair compensation that Amazon should just provide. So here's the
Yeah.
fucked up part. The capitalists are so stupid, greedy, and mean that they would rather fight you in court knowing that there's a good chance that they'll lose and pay out way more than they would pay out if they just had like high level death insurance on everyone in that building.
Yeah.
Like if you had really high level death insurance on everyone in that building, even if it was fantastic death insurance, it's going to be like $250,000, $500,000. Okay. But if Amazon forces this into court, they may end up losing $5 million per family wronged or more. It's not unheard of. But they would still rather cut all the costs and take those occasional hits from the lawsuits than consider doing something that would be remotely resembling the right thing. Not even really the right thing in my mind, but remotely resembling the right thing, which is to have a generous policy for the death of every employee that pays out to their families.
Well, that brings up a really good topic. It's one of those rabbit holes, but it's just sort of sitting out there, so I can't help it. Why the heck is there an industry that profits off people dying in this country and charges to get rid of the body?
Oh, more than one industry. Let's be clear.
True.
Yeah, no. Mortuary services extremely expensive. And yeah, I mean, no matter what, I'm not even going to say that this is the least that they should do, because you need to do more than this even, period. But Amazon should definitely be paying for all those funerals, because that's a huge unexpected expense. And again, for some of these contract workers, Amazon's going to try not to pay out any money to some of those families right away, most likely.
Of course.
Now, they might decide that the PR is so bad that they just bow to it right away, but the odds of that are really, really low. So the more likely scenario is that some of these contract workers' families are going to pay $10,000 or more to bury their dead loved one, and then fight for years to get money back from Amazon. And they may win big in the end, because Amazon is probably going to be found to be negligent here.
Oh, yeah.
And so, the payment could be huge, but what amount of money do you have to fine Amazon for it to make a fucking difference? You could fine Amazon $250 million for this disaster, and they would just move on tomorrow and fucking just cross it off on their checkbook. $250 million, 250 million, and they would just mark that line out on a ledger somewhere. I'm not exaggerating. They really would not. They would barely have to shift things around to accommodate that loss. It would not be enough that they would make major changes to any of their plans. It would not disrupt the major flow of their company in any way. It would probably mean some things like certain offices were out of the nice coffee for a while.
Not even really that.
I'm just thinking it usually gets shafted down onto the worker, you know? If there's going to be any effect, they'll cut some costs on the workers, and, the toilet paper gets a little worse in all of the Amazon company bathrooms. That's a joke. They don't have bathrooms.
That's why people bring their water bottles to work at Amazon.
Yeah, you notice my big water bottle tonight? This is the Amazon issued,
Yeah. We all know what that's for.
No, actually, I just live in the desert, and it's
Yeah,
really
no,
dehydrated.
Yeah, you live in but at Amazon, we all know what that's for.
So, yeah, none of this is really going to change anything unless we agitate about it.
That's for sure.
Is one of the big takeaways that I'm feeling right now. Amazon workers have been trying to organize in different places. I hope that this really stokes those fires. I hope that employees who have been on the fence about joining a union go, oh shit,
we need a union.
We need a union. And I hope that other people are able to get something good out of this, because it's such a huge tragedy. It's hard to imagine anything good coming out of it, but that's about all we can hope for, right?
Well, I mean, when as many people end up dead as are probably going to after all the counting is done, you really end up getting to the point where you say to yourself, well, this is what it takes for capitalism to change anything. Another really good example of that is any airline disaster show you care to pick.
Hey guys.
Hey Kim,
hey.
Welcome, folks. This is our guest tonight, Kim Brown, host of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Thank you for joining us.
Am I late? Have I fumbled this somehow? I'm so sorry.
No, it was 30 minutes ago, but that's cool.
I'm so sorry.
It's all good.
No.
It's all good. This is just a goofy YouTube show we like to do with people like you who we find interesting.
Thank you,
but
guys.
it's not the end of the world.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, the advantage of being on YouTube and not having a set time slot is you can always add an extra half hour if somebody pops up late or whatever you need to do.
That's true. I mean,
all good.
I worked commercial radio for a long time, and that kind of flexibility, it just simply does not exist because capitalism has already paid for those minutes in advance. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, no, this is wonderful. I'm so glad to get the invitation to come hang out with you both.
Well,
we're
we
so glad
loved
to have you
having
back.
you the first time, and so we're glad to have you back now.
Yeah, man. I'm sorry. I'm a big stoner also, so I have
Relatable.
We approve of that.
to
We
myself.
approve of that.
I was like, yeah, 10 o'clock. That's what they totally said 10 o'clock, right? Yeah. So I just went with it. So my bad.
Okay.
Hey, I was almost late to this show. What was it, last week or 2 weeks ago?
Mhm.
I showed up like 5 minutes late. And I was just like, I'm fine. I'm not high.
You show up to your party when you get there, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like, okay, so I just popped up on I'm assuming that a discussion about what the tragedy that happened in the Midwest with all the tornadoes and the deaths and the just outright, I mean, it's carnage. Like tornadoes, I don't, if you've never lived in that part of the country, I'm not sure if you understand like how scary tornadoes actually are. Here on the East Coast, I live outside of DC. The most major, weather catastrophic events that we get might be the remnants of a hurricane or occasional like flash flooding. Like the flash flooding stuff has gotten a bit intense over the past decade or so, but like a tornado, like tornadoes and floods and flash floods are like the scariest things because they come out of nowhere and you can't run from them really. And what those folks experienced in Kentucky with a tornado coming up on them at night that stayed on the ground, I mean, that is worst case nightmare scenario. So I mean, it's just horrifying.
Plus, when they keep you working till the last minute, that never helps either.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, and that's that one in the factory in Kentucky and the Amazon warehouse. Were both situations where they could have had people in shelters sooner and nobody would have died. I mean, because think about it. How often do you hear about some place being taken out by a tornado while people are working in it?
Not usually.
And that's just because they usually, most places, once it starts to be, once they know there's danger, they do what they're supposed to do. Now, that doesn't mean everybody stops working because of a tornado warning. But when they know that a tornado is coming their way, they get to shelter.
Well, this is like I was saying earlier, all the time you'll see in the news after a big tornado, $20 million in property damage and one casualty. That's very common after a tornado because people know what to do. And we have, developed a lot of tools as a society to deal with things like that when they come. And so, the people that live in places that are tornado prone are kind of ready for it in general. And so, like I said, you'll see these headlines that, 75 houses were destroyed. No one was killed. That's super common after a tornado. So why, again, like we were getting at earlier, why do we have this unbelievably high body count here? It has to be because of unusual circumstances. And that definitely very much includes Amazon insisting that these employees were going to work well past when it made sense, when they could have just easily said, okay, folks, we're going out of the basement as soon as those sirens started. And 2 hours of work?
I mean, it's not particularly rocky soil in Illinois. They could dig an underground tornado-proof warehouse if they really needed to, make it tunnel accessible.
I think though, if I understood the facts of what the workers there in Edwardsville experience is that they were not permitted to have their personal cell phones on their person while working on the floor of the warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so you're denying people really the choice, their own choice to make a decision for themselves, whether or not they want to remain or seek their own shelter, but they weren't given that opportunity because they didn't have the personal notifications. They were relying on Amazon to tell them what was
and here's this is creepy, but I was reading a picture of a text message that was sent by one of the people who died to his girlfriend, where he commented, "They're not letting us leave. So I'll see you when I get back. Love you."
I saw on the NBC Nightly News tonight, I think that was it, that apparently on the same day that the Amazon warehouse collapsed, Jeff Bezos was tweeting about how awesome Blue Origin was.
Yes.
Something just completely just so disconnected to his workers in the fact that people lost their lives in order to make Jeff Bezos a few extra pennies. That
whatever he's made it clear, this is, I mean, it was more understandable, even if it was horrible, for him to like ignore and not talk about like other abuses that happen at the Amazon warehouse, like people peeing in bottles or something like that.
Yeah.
But now he's made it clear, regardless of the level of harm that his company causes, he will simply pretend it did not happen.
Yes. But then you have to remember that Jeff Bezos has already achieved the ambition of his life by putting Captain Kirk in space for real.
I need people to raise their expectations for themselves. Like, if that's what Jeff Bezos is going, Jeff Bezos is a fucking asshole. Like,
yes. As can best be noted by the fact that even his wife couldn't tolerate him anymore. And I don't mean to cast aspersions on Mackenzie. It's just, we all can see Jeff Bezos, and unless your tastes are outside of the standard American norm, his primary attraction is the money. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that.
I'd say so, but I mean, even still. I don't know. He's too evil for me.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, no, I picture Lex Luthor or the bald guy from James Bond, Blofeld.
Yeah, that's about the size of it.
And Elon Musk, Time Person of the Year. While we're talking about rich assholes.
Oh my gosh, Person of the Year.
What did he do? Did he do, like, besides being rich?
So what he did, and Jeff Bezos, well, not Bezos personally, Blue Horizon is suing SpaceX over this. But Elon Musk landed a whole bunch of really lucrative NASA contracts for SpaceX.
Yeah.
That's what he accomplished, really. And he became the richest man in the world twice. First jumping ahead of Bezos, and then Bezos jumping ahead of him, and then him jumping ahead of Bezos again. So right now, at this moment, Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. And remember, he went from being a low-tier billionaire down here so that my hand is off the screen and you can't see it, to being, richest man in the world.
Oh, man.
He did that in the course of 1 year because of COVID.
You know what's amazing about being the richest man in the world is that apparently you don't have a stylist when you're the richest man in the world. Like when you get a certain level of rich, like you have people help you with your wardrobe and stuff like that. But then you get a certain level of rich again, and you just put on that cowboy hat, Jeff. Elon Musk on the cover of Time looked like a rat person. He looked like a man that had just climbed out of a dystopian apocalyptic future. I don't even know how to describe the way he looked.
You're saying you think Elon Musk resembles Mayor Pete too?
I think Mayor Pete is a handsome mouse by comparison.
I agree. I'd say Mayor Pete is he's conventionally attractive, right?
Yes,
He's at least a little bit conventionally attractive, and also he definitely understands. He has a stylist. See, Mayor Pete, he's still in that nice medium zone of wealth where people like help him with his hair.
He's actually relatively low level wealth. He was one of the poorest candidates in this last race, but that's not going to last much longer.
Is that his personal wealth, or I mean, what does his husband do? Like, does his husband have money?
That I'd have to look into. I don't know about that, but yeah, that's his personal wealth. You're right.
Yeah, those politicians, the poor politicians, they usually marry some money. Yeah, I mean that's part of the stepping game, is it not? Like two poors usually can't make it together. Bill and Hillary, I think maybe and I guess Barack and Michelle.
Well, no, Bill and Hillary were not. This is very important to remember. Right. Bill and Hillary were not two poors. Hillary was a very privileged young lady.
That's right. Her father was an attorney. Lawyer.
Her father was an attorney in New York,
okay.
I believe.
Just like Kim Kardashian.
What was that?
Just like Kim Kardashian.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. Well, Robert Kardashian was a big attorney out in L.A. OJ. I think that's the one thing everybody really can associate Robert Kardashian's name with. There were a bunch of other cases too, but the OJ trial is the big one.
That's the only one I would know of. But that was sort of like the dawn of like the national trial, right? Where it was happening. And it wasn't the only one, but it was certainly the biggest one, and like set the standard after that of, how these trials were covered on TV.
That was when Johnny Cochran finally made the decision to go from someone who had always kind of been a social justice lawyer to being the Don King of the legal profession.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Chris, because well, anyway, I don't think this is conspiracy theory. I think there's maybe some truth in this, but Johnny Cochran, in advance of his passing away, was purportedly working on a mass reparations class action lawsuit, not only against the government, but supposedly also against corporations that profited off slavery and were still in
and you have to be able to do those kinds of cases. You have to make your money somewhere.
Oh, totally. I mean, because that's 25 years. You know what I mean? Like, imagine what the discovery would look like,
That's true.
Getting all kinds of crazy stuff. So, but
no, you're right. That's fair feedback.
Black people believe that Johnny Cochran was actually killed somehow. You know what I'm saying?
I believe it.
He was very healthy at the time of his passing. You know what I mean? It's not like he didn't have access
and he wasn't shockingly old or anything like that.
No, not at all. I'm hoping for the courageous, journalist documentarian to delve into that, because I'm sure at least part of that work had to have been started, unless the government came in after he died on some like Nicholas Tesla shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was about to ask, did he get Tesla or something? Because if he put potentially decades of work into preparing for what would have been, the legal case of America's history, like the case, period. Then there's surely some documents somewhere that someone else could maybe make use of to try to continue that work. I just feel
legal documents have disappeared before in America's history.
True that. I just feel like most lawyers, they don't keep it all in their head. I don't know if you've met many lawyers out there, folks watching the show, but I know a couple of lawyers, and they write things down.
Yes.
Lots and lots of writing. Like, they write down more shit than like anybody you know.
Privileged, so so it can't just be taken from them and given to somebody to read.
Yeah, but still, if there's some research out there that you did, at least some of it would be. I don't know.
Again, like
I'm mystery.
Pretty sure that's true.
I mean, so yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all for stuff to disappear. I mean, sure, you could say it's got to be out there somewhere, but stuff like that has disappeared before. Remember, there is actually a federal jury verdict on file that says the Memphis police killed Martin Luther King Jr. and not James Earl Ray. And the family believes this. And there's good arguments for it. The story from the guy who was convicted in the jury verdict, which didn't mean much. It was a small fine, but it was still a jury verdict, and it's still on the record. He was definitely up to something corrupt in Memphis. It definitely involved the cops, and it definitely involved harassing civil rights figures. And it's not too big of a leap from there to killing one of them.
Yeah.
It's what we do.
And we know all the Black Panthers and people thereafter that the federal government killed or locked up.
And the political prisoners, of today, the same thing is still happening. I can't recall the person's name, but a activist in San Diego who had been targeted, like one of a group of activists who had been targeted by prosecutors there, I think was vindicated, had the charges either dismissed or was found innocent of, inciting a riot or whatever trumped up thing they decided to do. And it's like,
there was a case in the UK where they were charging Extinction Rebellion protesters with terrorism, and they managed to beat those charges. There was another one where they were charging members of an immigrant rights group that was basically trying to interfere with the takeoff on deportation flights. They charged them as terrorists. Fortunately, they beat the charges.
Also, I mean, Memphis police are notoriously corrupt. I know what I'm talking about here because my grandfather was murdered by the Memphis police.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that.
I mean, it happened a long time ago, but thank you. The police ruled his death as a suicide. Conveniently, there was a lot of cash missing from his house, and he had been shot in the back of the head. He was legally blind, by the way, as a little side note. So I don't know how you suicide.
It doesn't seem the most.
That's not really how it's done.
It's not the natural way. Let's put it that way.
It's not the natural way to do it. And there was a whole history there with him owning a bar and them extorting him for money, and him eventually losing that bar and all the money, basically. And I mean, he didn't have. He was a veteran and a right-leaning individual. He had no political qualms with the police, but the Memphis police were extraordinarily corrupt back then. This is like close to the same era that King was killed. And so the Memphis police were extraordinarily corrupt back then. And I think if you would put that past the Memphis police, you're wild. Remember, because they were literally just a mafia back then. The Memphis police lit the city on fire. Never forget.
So what were the Dallas police like during that same era?
Oh my God, so good.
The reason I ask about the Dallas police during that same era is because Jack Ruby was a nightclub owner, which is something that involves staying on the good side of the cops.
I don't know. The Kennedy assassination, don't know. Part of me is inclined to think it was the mob that did it, but you know, I mean, you can't put anything past the government. Everyone is on the table.
There are two answers, both official, both of which equally on the record. The first is the official FBI and Secret Service investigation, which says there was one shooter, it was Lee Harvey Oswald, done. All the conspiracy stuff is garbage. Ignore it. And then there's the House and Senate Joint Committee on Assassinations, which, I'm sorry. The Senate Select Committee on Assassinations, my apologies, which decided that after hearing all the evidence, they ruled that the mafia was responsible. Now, I'm not saying the mafia wasn't responsible, but there's an interesting bit of organized crime history from this period that intersects with CIA history from this period, which is that before and during and after the JFK presidency, the CIA was trying really hard to kill Fidel Castro. The man in charge of the CIA operations in Cuba to kill Fidel Castro was a Florida gangster who was originally from Havana and who was one of the few people who still had contacts and moved back and forth to some degree between Cuba and the U.S., named Santos Traficante Jr. It later turned out, as Russian files were declassified, that Santos Traficante Jr. was a double agent who was working for the Cubans and Castro. The whole time he was working for the CIA in charge of attempts to kill Castro.
I like where this is going.
So, I mean, there's all sorts of theories out there for everything from Castro did it because he knew JFK was coming after him, to the CIA did it because JFK didn't want to let them fight a war in Laos. There's actually a documentary about this, which is pretty good, even if it's kind of leans heavy into the JFK worship. But there was a crisis in Laos. During the whole time, there were crises in Vietnam, and it was the same sort of thing, fighting back and forth on both sides between a pro-U.S. and an anti-U.S. government, with the anti-U.S. government being communists. And so all this stuff is going on, and Kennedy goes out of his way not to get the U.S. involved in a shooting war. And then after he's dead, LBJ gets the U.S. into a shooting war in Vietnam.
And bombs the hell out of Laos as well.
Yes.
Yep.
And Cambodia.
And then Nixon does even worse.
You want to talk about reparations? Like, I mean, the U.S. I mean, we should take everything Bezos, Elon Musk has, and redistribute it. Give it all back. Give it all back.
And then when you think about it, well, what was John McCain doing when he was captured? Well, he was dropping bombs on innocent people in Vietnam.
Yep. And all those goofy Democrats showed up at his funeral and boo-hooed and boo-hooed. And I'm like, look at y'all crying over a fucking war criminal.
Well, how many Democrats are war criminals?
And Colin Powell. They love shedding.
They love Colin Powell. Well, you know,
the war criminals are their favorites.
Well, you know, Colin Powell is like Eisenhower. He was one of those guys who, because he wasn't political until the moment he finally decided to run for office, both sides could pretend he was theirs. And then when Eisenhower finally ran as a Republican, it hurt Harry Truman's feelings so bad, even though he had already decided not to run for re-election, that he felt personally betrayed by Eisenhower and didn't speak to him again until after JFK's funeral.
Damn. Petty. I like it.
Yeah, no, he was so angry at Eisenhower for running as a Republican because Truman had been trying to convince Eisenhower to run as a Democrat. So he was mad at Eisenhower for running as a Republican. But Eisenhower didn't know Truman wasn't going to run again, and he thought that the most reliable way to stop Douglas MacArthur from becoming president was to beat him in the Republican primary.
I mean, many would argue that Eisenhower was the last of the so-called civil Republicans, you know, the kind of Republicans that modern day Democrats lament, like, oh, we need a strong Republican Party. Like Eisenhower was really the last, I think, incarnation.
He was the first president to send the National Guard to forcibly integrate a school.
That's right.
You can say that he didn't really want to. You can say that he wasn't particularly anti-racist. He wasn't particularly pro-black. All of that does not matter nearly as much as the fact that he did it.
Same with LBJ. You know, that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, because the Democrats now say they're pro-black and talk a great game about being anti-racist, but what do?
They wear kente cloth and kneel in the vestibule of the house for some ridiculous exercise. I'm like, what is this? No. This does not get me closer to freedom, Nancy Pelosi in a kente cloth. Like, what? Stop this.
Yeah, I would rather have politicians that I disagreed with a little bit more, but that did what they said they were fucking gonna do.
Not just what they were going to do, but who went out of their way, at least by the time they were president. Because this is something that obviously isn't the case anymore. But it used to be the sort of thing that politicians thought to themselves. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be a crook all my life, but when I'm president, I'm going to do something really good for my legacy. And that's exactly how LBJ thought of it. He was a big crook, but when he had the chance to actually do it, he was like, I'm going to pass this healthcare stuff, and I'm going to pass this welfare stuff, and I'm going to pass this civil rights stuff because I don't care if the Democrats don't win for a few years after. It's the right thing to do, and I'm going to be dead while they're losing.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe Biden has no sense of a legacy. He is perfectly content to be a footnote president, fondly remembered by history. Like, you know, when you're scrolling through the names of president and you're like, was that Herbert Gumford? I don't remember that one. You know.
As bad as it is that America won the Cold War instead of losing it, the Cold War, for all the things that were wrong with it, was good in that the Cold War forced the United States government to be more honest than it has been since the Cold War ended. The Cold War forced the United States government to do certain things, to be concerned about their legacies, and to think about history, and to think, I really have to do something for these people. Otherwise, there could be a revolution and the commies will win.
Yeah, because, I mean, propaganda has to be backed up by something.
Yeah.
I think that's something that the modern Democrats seem to have forgotten completely. Is that propaganda, if it's going to be effective, it's going to be backed up by something. And so if they're going to shove tons of anti-communist propaganda down the throats of Americans during the Red Scare, they need to back that up with a little bit of social programs, a little bit of things that the people are asking for in order to make people, because people, no matter how much propaganda you feed them, they're going to occasionally hear things from outside of the propaganda sphere. And so people are occasionally going to hear things about life in the USSR that doesn't sound so bad. And they're going to go, but then they'll go, but Social Security has gotten so much better here,
Yeah.
and
there's a big difference too. The USSR was a threat. Kim, how many of the countries that the U.S. calls enemies these days are actually a threat to the United States?
I would say, zero.
Exactly.
It's funny because this week, really last week, because today is Monday. So last week, did you guys notice in the news cycle that it was negative stories pertaining to Russia, China, and Iran?
And this morning on Morning Joe, they had Ed Luce, David Ignatius, and another foreign policy guy. I don't remember who the third guy was, but they're talking about basically why we have to do something militarily in Ukraine to scare Russia. So they're here basically drum beating for war with Russia in Ukraine.
Of course, because there's an unpopular Democratic president in the White House, and this is what Democrats do. But it's not obviously not just Democrats. Republicans start wars all the fucking time when they're in power. We were very fortunate that Trump didn't start a war before he left office.
He was unusual for a Republican.
yes, but no, I'm not shocked at all that the drumbeat has begun on Iran, and it's like, come on, and especially against the backdrop of the House, passing that very massive defense spending bill for the Pentagon last week, at the same time that Jen Psaki was standing at the podium, sort of gawking at the idea that the federal government pay for COVID tests for every American. It's like,
yeah, we're going to send COVID tests to people's homes, and she acts like that's impossible. Now, keep in mind that the UK, through the NHS, actually sends people a 7-pack of COVID tests every couple of days.
Jeez, wow. It's too bad that's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's too hard.
It's interesting too, because one of the only things that I've seen touted as like a potential actual thing that you can point to as a good thing that Biden has done is he has massively reduced the drone program in many respects. But how significant is that if he's spending the same amount on the military and beating the drums of war? Does it matter that much if the bombs are dropped by a drone, or if we go back to having human pilots?
Let's also be clear that when we're talking about scaling back the drone program, we're talking about scaling it back from the insane Trump levels. Because one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is how much Trump loved killing people with drones, and how he removed certain safeguards from the process so that it became much easier for the military to kill people with drones.
Yep.
In some cases without even asking the president's permission anymore.
Yep.
Whereas before, the president had to issue a finding on each and every killing. So Trump,
although that's disturbing unto itself when you think about it, because Barack Obama was obsessed with drone killings.
Yes,
and if he was submitting a little mini essay on every single drone killing, that is psychopathic.
So that's just saying. Now, mind you, that I am not.
And George Bush before him, same story. Say you're both fucking psychopaths. If you're
keep in mind that I am.
Goddamn.
I am not a national security expert, but I do read Tom Clancy. And reading Tom Clancy has made a lot of Republicans national security experts. So it ought to do something for me too.
Well, I was going to say, but hold on. My logic, or stoner logic, whatever, what have you, tells me that the only reason that Joe Biden has been able to scale down the drone program is because the war in Afghanistan ended. Yeah, like
well,
wouldn't that just be?
Well, no, it's because Trump scaled it up so much. When you
Trump literally scaled it up past any possible need, necessity, or remote sense.
Yeah, they were killing people left and right and not telling anyone about it. It was gross. And that was the whole thing. They made it so much more secretive so that now the media didn't even know what was happening.
It's going to be like George Bush, where we don't find out how many people Trump really killed until many years from now. And then we find out, oh, George Bush killed maybe up to 5 million people. And we're just supposed to swallow that possibility like it's no big deal.
Northern Witch, hi, baby girl. Northern Witch is in the chat.
Yes.
Hanging out with us. Hello, sweetie. I don't know. I hate everybody. I feel like I hate all.
But but that's basically when Obama scaled it down. Biden scaled it back down to the Obama level. And we all know what the Obama level of drone operations was.
So what you're saying is Biden's gonna bomb a Nobel Peace Prize winner this week.
That's possible.
Yeah, he might. That's totally on.
Hey, Obama took out a guy who was really on the terror list and his son. And even though they were probably innocent, the guy really was on the terror list. And the other person who was killed was actually related to someone on the terror list. Whereas Biden's first public drone mistake was blowing up 10 completely innocent people.
Yes.
What's next? A wedding?
Give him some time. I'm sure the Saudis are already working on that in Yemen.
Oh my gosh.
All the crazy shit they bought from the US. It was weird. So I was watching Meet the Press. I've said this lots of times. I hate watch NBC News. I
hate watch Morning Joe. I get good material from it, and I have to be up early to go to work anyway.
I was hate watching Chuck Todd and Meet the Press, and he had Anthony Blinken on there. And what did this asshole say? And he was talking about Putin and Biden, and the president gave very stern warning. I'm like, Putin don't give a fuck about what Joe Biden's got to say to him. Why? Anyway, so talking about amassing Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, et cetera. And then Anthony Blinken went on this long-winded thing about how improper it is to interfere in other countries' relations and how disrupting their democracy, it's such an affront to, the global community. I'm like, can you hear yourself? I'm like, yes, I'm sure the Cubans exactly feel that exact sentiment, and the Venezuelans and so many others. And
So let's take a moment to reflect on the fact that in addition to all the coups you know about, the United States actually overthrew the Labour government of Australia to replace them with right-wingers.
Wow. When was this? How
it was back in the 60s.
Even still, Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. We'll coup white people in modern times. We don't give a fuck.
And the Crown was okay with this? Britain didn't think that we were overstepping our bounds?
Britain probably signed off on it.
No, I don't know that Britain knew about what was going on at that point, because we have never told them everything. And there was specifically a period during which the Brits were not terribly fond of America because of the things the CIA was doing without their permission. But the government that was installed by the CIA was the only one that sent troops to help us in Vietnam out of all our allies.
Huh. Funny how that works.
Yeah, Australia's been there through thick and thin, probably because they know we'll overthrow their government if they're not there for us.
Well, now we don't have to. I mean, they're unbelievably fascist.
It's once upon a time, the literal Nazis were taking instruction about how to be fascist from the United States. But now the United States has learned how to treat asylum seekers from Australia.
Australia would be like, you want asylum? Here's this little island of rocks.
Yeah.
It's far away from the mainland. We'll put you here while we think about it for 10 decades.
Yeah. And they were doing this with almost exclusively with brown people from majority Muslim countries.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. Who else would they do it again?
And then all of a sudden, the United States starts copying that with people seeking asylum from Central America under Trump. And while there's always been people in cages on the border, most of them have not been asylum seekers in the past. And deliberately adopting that policy for asylum seekers, as Biden is still doing now, is kind of sick.
Yep.
Well, that and still using the Title 42, which is what the COVID protocols or the COVID restrictions that Trump put in place. I mean, I think it was just last week that Biden announced that they were going to extend that.
Yes. And they've also.
But what's ridiculous about that is that you have 60 million people in this country who have not yet been vaccinated, and there's vaccines overflowing across the country. So why not do the humane thing and send all those vaccines to all the people who were sitting at the Mexican border awaiting some sort of action on their asylum claims or whatever? Like, to use COVID as an excuse when this country is flush with vaccines is just
because intellectual property. You don't want to undercut the profits of big pharma after you've gone to so much work to hand them to them with a little bow on it. I mean, I'm definitely not an anti-vaxxer, but one thing that the anti-vaxxers do have right is how much unearned wealth big pharma is getting out of this vaccine. And the reason I say unearned is even Pfizer did not pay out any money to develop its vaccine, even though it was not part of the Project Warp Speed. Pfizer's vaccine was developed by this little research company called BioNTech, which Pfizer then stepped in and bought after it patented the vaccine. And then Pfizer got the vaccine that way. Whereas the other companies, Moderna and J&J, were handed the vaccine by the U.S. government saying, here, we're giving you an exclusive license for this patent that our Operation Warp Speed people came up with. Go make some money.
Yep.
And
but yeah, if there was any sense to it, I agree so strongly with you, Kim, on this. If there was any sense to it, if you're going to say the threat is coronavirus, we've got vaccines here ready to go, why would you not simply vaccinate everyone at the border? I mean, hell, even if they're just coming to visit, why not? Just say, hey, you want to visit? You're not vaccinated yet? Well, if you want to come visit, you got to get vaccinated first. Let's just do it right now. Boom. You're vaccinated. Come into the country.
And why are we not sending India, Brazil, and South Africa all the vaccines they want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why do we have immediate neighbors countries that are nearby in Latin and South America that don't have enough doses of vaccine. If we got plenty.
Well, because we
if
don't
it's such
want
a
to
big
share.
issue, especially if it's such a big issue and it's such a big issue in regards to immigration, especially, well, then why would we not just make that easier? Huh? It's because the whole point at this point is to be anti-immigration, just like how the Democrats used to be kind of anti-war, and then that died. Like the pro-immigration, there's no pro-immigration party in America anymore. There's no one in the halls of Congress with a pro-immigration stance. The very best that you have are some people are neutral as opposed to violently, sadistically against. And that's it. But there aren't any actual, what people think of as a pro-immigration stance in general is just being neutral on immigration. A pro-immigration stance is something we rarely see in this country anymore because it's considered completely out of the window of politics to be actually pro-immigration. To suggest that it would be good for us to encourage people to immigrate here is considered a complete non-starter and insane idea that could not be taken seriously.
And this is true. It's really ridiculous. It's costing the whole world incredible amounts of money and threatening to crash financial systems, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately for the world, the United States government is propping up the U.S. market, and the U.S. market props up all the others.
For now.
For now.
for the time being. The house is starting to look a little shaky. But, you have to never underestimate the power that white supremacy holds even over, the economic policy decisions that are made. Yeah, allowing more immigration would benefit the economy, but that means benefiting Black and brown people.
Well,
we can't do that. I mean, that's a bridge too far. That's a bridge.
Not only are you right,
Russians come in, huh?
Not only are you right, but the people who have been in charge of our immigration policy or at least consulting heavily on it for decades are absolutely white supremacists who advocate keeping the wrong people out of the country while at the same time advocating for things like passive eugenics and, not necessarily taking care of everyone if there's a pandemic. And I've had Brooke Binkowski, who's a journalist who's tried very hard to inform people of this stuff on the show a couple times. And these are the people who have been advising presidents on our immigration policy since Ronald Reagan. It's scary, but they're literally white supremacists.
Oh yeah, and Tucker Carlson talks that shit on his show nightly about these people coming to the borders are here to replace us. Who's us? Us who?
So what you have to remember is you have to remember the American Legion's motto of 100% Americanism. And 100% Americanism was a very well coded way of saying white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
For sure.
And so when the American Legion said it advocated 100% Americanism, people knew what they were talking about.
Yep.
Just like all those people know what Trump is talking about. Just like all those people, what some of the other ones, Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, like they are hearing them loud and clear, and that to me is so partially one reason why I just can't stand like the cowardice, I guess, of Democrats. Because again, like, why
Mm-hmm.
are these people? Why are you lamenting as Democrats, lamenting the status of the strength of the health of the Republican Party? If these are the people that they are choosing to amplify, who's that asshole in Missouri? The Hawley. Who's another asshole?
Gosh, Hawley.
Madison Cawthorn. Like, I
Also,
Paul Gosar.
listen. If politics is going to be a team sport, can y'all at least get competitive? Okay. If we're just going to like wave our blue flag or our red flag and cheer anyway, like at least take it seriously. When your high school is beating the ass of the neighboring high school every year in basketball or football or whatever, you don't go, oh dang, it's too bad their team. We should really make sure they have a strong team next year. You go, no, we crush those guys every year, and then that helps us get to the playoffs. Fuck those nerds.
Yeah.
Why? The Democrats are like, oh, we need a strong Republican Party. The only way the Republican Party can be stronger is if y'all lose some seats. What the fuck are you saying?
Nobody.
Point there, Kennedy. Yes.
Kim, you're in D.C., right?
Yes, right outside.
How many football team fans? I'm going to love saying that for as long as I can keep saying it. Yes. How many football team fans are out there saying we really need a strong New York Giants and a strong Philadelphia Eagles?
Never. I mean, never. It has killed them at all times, at every opportunity.
That's what I thought.
They're not saying, can't we give a little of our budget over to the Eagles so that they play a little better this year?
When John McGraw had lost his touch and was building these horrible Giants teams that were failing to compete in the National League, even as the Yankees were winning pennant after pennant, the Yankees were never, let's give the Giants some of our money so that they can put a better team together. They never did that, not once.
Again, this is why the Democratic Party, I mean, there has to be some sort of mass exodus. And I think it's already happening. Like, again, when you look at the numbers of people or registered voters, people who do not affiliate with any party, I mean, that number is greater than those who are party affiliated. So it's like...
And it's been going up significantly since 2012. That's the other part people are forgetting about this mass exodus. It's not like the Democrats just now pissed everybody off. In 2012, I remember that's when I started to feel like, damn, I don't know how much longer I can keep voting for these Democrats. And I went ahead and I voted for Barack Obama a second time because I thought maybe he'll actually follow through in his second term on some of this, getting us out of Guantanamo Bay, doing some of that kind of stuff like he talked about. And of course, none of that happened. And so, you know, I think that's one of the things people forget is like, this is not just some thing where people are just got mad just because of 2020 and it's brand new and people are just making a rash decision and they're up. No. People have been wanting to leave the Democratic Party since Clinton. And you are just providing the exit door with all this bullshit that you're doing.
Well, I'm curious, you know, I mean, what are the issues? Like, what are Democrats running on in 2022 and 2024 if they are not running against Donald Trump? Like, what are y'all running on?
Are they running on once again promising the things that were all supposed to happen in Joe Biden's first 30 days?
Do you want me to tell you what I think? Because I can.
Yes, I do, because I have no idea.
So first, they're gonna pass something. I don't know what, but they're gonna pass something that actually helps someone a little tiny bit. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of corporate welfare in it, but they're going to do that as close to the midterms as they can possibly do. And second, and this is much more important, they're going to make the whole midterm election a referendum on January 6th.
That's a losing strategy.
Why are they making the whole election about my birthday?
Because you deserve it.
Actually, that's an acceptable answer.
January 6th will now be Kennedy Cooper Day in the United States.
Oh, Capricorn. That's Capricorn energy. Yes.
That's right.
All right.
Right.
Oh, now January 6th makes even more sense now that I put it into that context, right? It just stormed the gate. Right?
Yes. Too much Capricorn energy.
Chris, here's why I don't think that. I think the second thing that you said is going to happen. I think the first thing I don't think is going to happen because, for the simple fact that again, Joe Biden and especially during the course of trying to get those 2 Georgia senators elected, I mean, they lied to people. They already lied to us and told us they were going to give us $2,000, and they haven't. And Joe Biden and the Democrats allowed themselves to be punked out of cutting, assistance and COVID assistance.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, the reason why unemployment is so high is because Joe Biden's paying you to stay home. You know what I mean? So Joe Biden and the Democrats are already too scared, I think, to additional stimulus. But the right foot corporate welfare, I mean, that was all that PPP shit. Like the motherfuckers with little LLCs and even as high as people like Tom Brady were
plenty of
PPP loans. So like the corporate welfare of the COVID assistance, that shit is already happening.
Plenty of politicians in both parties were taking out PPP loans
because they knew what was up.
And all those PPP loans have been forgiven.
Oh wow! They were already
the PPP loans have been forgiven despite all the fraud that riddled the system.
Wow! See, I was not quick enough on the draw. I will know better next time. Let me get
I gotta get me some of these PPP loans next time. What the fuck?
Seriously.
Well,
I don't know. They're probably gonna run on abortion, right? But that's I don't know.
Run on abortion, but people are going to point out, well, who was president? Who controlled the Senate? Who controlled Congress? Why are you trying to make this all about Republican judges?
Here's the thing, too, is that none of this matters because the morality of 2022 will not determine that election because the gerrymandering has gotten so much worse just in the last couple of years, and the voter suppression has gotten so much worse just in the last couple of years, that if the Democrats don't do anything, they can't win. Regardless, even if truly all the same people, including people that held their nose and could barely do it in 2020, went out and voted for Democrats in 2022 and just said, fuck it, I'm voting straight ticket, I'm voting all the goddamn Democrats once again, even though I hate it, because I think that, it will be the right thing for my community or whatever. Even if everybody went out and did that, the Democrats would lose the House.
Well, yeah. Somebody actually tweeted something about how they thought that I don't care what your politics are. The absolute minimum that the Democrats have to do to be able to win the midterms is pass a Voting Rights Act.
Oh, what genius tweeted that?
It wasn't somebody really super far out on the left. It was someone just left enough in the Democratic Party that they'd probably be more comfortable with us than other Democrats most of the time. That wouldn't mean they wouldn't vote for the Democratic congressman.
But I mean, it sounds like it's such a simple proposition, does it not? But it's at the same time, it's like you can't even whip your caucus properly in the fucking Senate. Like, Joe Manchin would probably be an obstructionist if he's not already.
Well, let's be blunt.
Yeah.
Let's be blunt. What power would Joe Manchin have if the Democrats held or picked up seats in the Senate? Joe Manchin's power comes from being necessary for the Democrats to keep their majority.
But where are the Democrats possibly going to be competitive senatorially in these races?
That's the thing is they're really not. I mean, Let me think for a moment.
Because when is that Kentucky Senate race? Is Booker
Booker is running against Rand Paul in the 2022 election.
2022. Okay.
Midterm.
So Charles Booker could probably be competitive, very competitive against Rand Paul, but is the DNC going to support Charles Booker, or are they going to prop up another Amy McGrath?
Well, my prediction is Charles Booker is the nominee for the Democratic Party no matter what happens. I don't think they can stop Booker from being the nominee now that he has name recognition. It's like they couldn't stop Cori Bush on her second go around, even though they really did try.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
But it's not a Cori Bush sort of district where all Booker has to do is win the nomination and he wins the Senate race.
Right.
I mean, it could be a very competitive race, but honestly, Paula Jean Swearingen should have been a competitive race in 2020. And the reason she wasn't is that the Democratic Party sort of forgot about her, and the West Virginia Democratic Party was actually supporting the Republican. So the real question for Booker is, will the Kentucky Democrats, after he's the nominee, support him or Rand Paul?
And if the Democrats...
Is that even on the table? Are those the choices that the Kentucky State Democratic Party has? Like, support the nominee or support the Republican?
That's generally the choices that most Democrats have shown that they have. And remember, in the state of New York chose to support the incumbent running as an independent write-in candidate over the black socialist for mayor of Buffalo. And he won re-election.
Oh, well, I know the election, and but I didn't know that the state Democratic Party had.
They didn't do it officially.
Okay.
But all the important state Democrats were basically endorsing Byron Brown, or at the very least refusing to endorse India Walton.
I mean, it's like the Virginia governor's race where they paid for ads.
Yeah.
They paid for what were essentially just positive ads for the Republican guy.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yikes.
Yeah. You didn't see that?
Well, the sad part of the Virginia's governor's race is that apparently the Democratic candidate's campaign thought that was going to win for them.
Yeah.
See, I mean, the fact that they ran Terry McAuliffe in the first place, to me, is indicative of a much larger problem for the Democrats. Is that at the end of the day, they really don't have a bench, right? And the bench that they actually do have, they don't want, right? Like, they are not inspiring, young candidates. Or candidates that voters can feel, impassioned to put their support behind. So when you dig up Terry McAuliffe, who had been governor 10 years prior, and
this is the thing,
Joe Biden, and you tell us that 95-year-old Joe Biden is going to be running again for president in 2024, along with a deeply unpopular vice president, and they keep kneecapping competitive folks, you know what I mean? Like Nina Turner, like Cory Booker also, and like I said, the bench that they have, they don't want the Ilhan Omars, they don't want the Rashida Tlaibs, they don't want Cori Bush, black woman loud about talking shit, calling them out on the carpet. They don't want that shit. You know what I mean? So I guess they don't want to win. That's the way I can look at it.
They actually went out of their way both to essentially cheat in the governor's primary and attack him from his own side of the party.
In Virginia, because
in Virginia, and they basically they drove Lee Carter out of state politics. He had been like the most effective Democrat in Virginia state politics in forever, and they passed all of this good stuff mostly because of him.
Mm-hmm.
And he took the side of all the people criticizing the DSA instead of DSA in some of these political arguments, and was basically distanced himself from DSA on purpose in his race. And DSA essentially tanked him on purpose. Not just the Democratic Party was already trying to cheat him in the first place. And because he distanced himself from DSA very spitefully let him go down.
What do you know? Was this for a delegate seat or a state Senate seat?
This was for his. It was for his state delegate seat.
Oh, now that may be more consequential than what it initially appears, because there had been a couple of recount elections for delegate seats in Virginia that have recently been called, and now Republicans have a slight majority in the Virginia House of Delegates, where Democrats have enjoyed a majority in both chambers and having the governor's mansion as well. And, as much as Ralph Northam had that controversy, which I will never forget, with the blackface and the Klan hood, and he could not tell us which one he was actually wearing. I mean, he did a lot of good stuff in Virginia during his governorship. Like, I feel as though he kind of went out of his way to try to make up for that. Restored voting rights, to formerly incarcerated people with felony convictions.
Yes.
Put down the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond that had stood for 130 years. He legalized marijuana. Like, he did all kinds of really, really, really progressive stuff that I'm sure Glenn Youngkin is going to come in and immediately undo. The first
He's going to put up 2 Robert E. Lee statues to replace the one that was taken down.
Probably. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Can I just say at this time that there were fewer good people than advertised on the Union side of the Civil War, and no good people on the Confederate side.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, I feel the need to get that out every now and then, not least because I grew up in the era where they were still saying it was about states' rights, not slavery.
Oh.
And well, there were good people on both sides, and if we had just been able to compromise. You're talking about compromising about slavery.
The next time somebody says it was about states' rights, you just ask them, states' rights about what?
Yes.
A state's right to do what? What was the right that the states were willing to go to war? What was the specific right that they were willing to go to war over? Because they didn't go to war over a concept. They didn't go to war over an idea.
They went to war out of fear that Abraham Lincoln would take their slaves away the same way he had helped take people's slaves away in Illinois.
But you see why there's such resistance by these, parents in these public school systems about learning American history. 200 years after the fact, the cause of the Civil War is still not settled business amongst most American people.
May I just say that the Space Traders is actually fairly easy to understand, and maybe we should be teaching critical race theory in middle school or high school.
But it makes white kids feel bad.
I don't think it does. It makes white parents feel bad.
You can't teach young white kids about racism. This is stuff that they're not prepared to learn about. But meanwhile, black and brown.
So let me ask you, Kim.
In the womb.
Kim, how old were you when you had to learn about racism, whether you wanted to or not?
I would have have to say, I'm guessing it had to been some form of elementary school. But it was this is in the 80s, so those kind of microaggressions will come through.
And for the record, I agree with Carrie. Parents are not worried their kids will feel bad in school. They're worried their kids will come home and make them feel bad.
That makes sense. That makes total sense.
No, that makes total sense, honestly, because I think most kids who are of like middle school, high school age that would potentially be learning this stuff, they're still at like an age where, in general, even if you're a white kid that has learned a lot of casual racism, you want to like be good to like your fellow students and your people around you to some extent, and like there's still like some effort there, and like I don't think many high schoolers have ingrained enough of that deep, disgusting racism to actually have most of them are going to be, now they're out there, to be clear, they're definitely out there, but I still think most high schoolers are just going to read critical race theory and be like, wow, our country's history is pretty messed up. Dang, okay, I need to think about that. And they're not going to feel like horrible about it. But yeah, it's their parents. They're going to go home to their parents and they're going to say, hey, did you know these things about like the enslavery of indigenous people? And their parents are going to say, I didn't learn that in school. What? And then they're going to feel embarrassed and potentially ashamed, especially if they realize that, oh, I work in an industry that, directly benefits from the, a history of oppression of another group of people. Wow.
So from my experience, like in just having attended majority white public schools and just sort of being able to observe white people in their natural habitat while they are very, very comfortable being themselves and not concerned about, what I thought about them at all, but, free to operate as however, like, I find that racism for the kids that are taught racism, they are taught that shit early, like
yes.
Early. Did you guys see this clip that was floating around? I think it was posted by the Tennessee Holler, and it was in a Tennessee public school classroom, maybe high school age, and this white girl starts losing it on her black teacher and like slapped her like on the arm or on the hand. It was like the text of the tweet said, and the teacher didn't slap her. I'm like, oh my God, did she slap her in the face? No, she didn't slap her in the face. She like slapped her on the arm. She still put her hands on her, but period.
Ridiculous.
So she gets on the white student gets on the phone and calls her mom. And she was like, Mom, blah, 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 blah. And the black teacher is this. You know what I mean? Now, what I read from that is that there was a specific reason why that teenager told their parents specifically that the conflict that they were having was with a black person, because they probably assumed that their parent would be empathetic because they have already been taught that you versus black people, you will be correct. You know what I mean? Now that's just my layperson reading on the situation, but don't underestimate, because even like I grew up in I guess what we would call a liberal area here in Central Maryland. Blue, reliably progressive white people voted for Bill Clinton and Obama, so they think that that they're not racist, they don't have no problems. I mean, but it's sometimes like that liberal racism that is subtle and unsubtle, very much at the same time. And these kids are taught that shit early, and they internalize it, and they move in the world accordingly. So I think that most students would benefit from critical race theory, but particularly white students. But I don't think it would make them feel bad. But I do think, I agree with what you were saying, Chris, that the resistance will come from the parents. Like the parents are like, why are you being taught to hate yourself?
Well, with desegregation. Kids resisted desegregation because their parents resisted desegregation. Absolutely. And they knew what their parents told them. But it was the parents who were really, really against it. Most of the kids were fine with having black kids in their schools after, 6 months to a year. Yeah.
And most kids adjusted relatively quickly too. I think what's important, I certainly am not challenging the assertion of young racists, because I've certainly met them. I know that they're real.
I know they exist.
But what I think what's crucial, and I think this is why teaching critical race theory in school is important in some ways to me, is that I think that once you're damaged by the economic system, the racism gets worse. That's what I've seen in the white folks in my family, in my life, is that when you're still a kid, it's a little easier to convince you to change your morals on something like that. But a lot of adult racisms, it's all wrapped up in economic violence and economic insecurity and stuff like that. And once it's become personal to your feelings of survival, oh my God, it's so much harder to convince someone to change their mind. That's what I've found a lot. And so, we should be teaching this to kids, because we can still reach them, like it's a great time to still reach them before they're even more set in their ways. And it's just, it's these parents that are completely set in their beliefs. And that's where, we were talking about immigration earlier. That's where we get this anti-immigration sentiment, and all of this stuff all links back to these white folks who have been convinced that their economic anxieties can be blamed on, a group of people that don't look the same as them.
Well, that's part of it. And I'm not going to deny the racism, because the racism is real. But the place the racism comes from is also a class place, which is, and this is the real killer of revolution throughout the ages. But the middle class, despite the fact that they are literally being robbed by the wealthy, are desperately afraid of the poor, who they believe are criminals. And race in America only makes that worse, because the way that we use race as a code for class in our system is primarily to identify poor people and criminals to cops. And so the middle class thinks of poor people and criminals the same way cops do, because the middle class feels like, well, they're on the cops' side and the cops are on their side. Plus, they're much more worried about being robbed by the poor than they are about actually doing something about the fact that they're being robbed by the rich.
I don't know. I don't disagree with either thing that you all said, but part of the reinforcement of the social hierarchy demands that white people still be at the top, right?
Yes.
And no matter how white people feel, even if they feel economically anxious, those fears are generally unfounded, right?
Because I'm not saying it's I definitely don't mean to give credence to a lot of that stuff, because a lot of it is white people that are actually quite well off compared to most folks, whining about not getting a new boat or something.
Well, what we're talking about.
That's what kills me. White folks will have some money, but they'll look at Elon Musk and be like, well, I don't have Elon Musk money. And it's no one has Elon Musk.
Right.
Why is that what you're comparing yourself to?
What we're talking about, again, is the downwardly mobile middle class, who, while not yet poor, are less well off, and there's numbers to prove it, are less well off than they were before Barack Obama took office. And they blame Barack Obama because he didn't help them.
Yes, they would be correct.
They would be, but then they also have this whole complex going on where Barack Obama not helping them basically convinces them that they were right to be racist in the first place and wrong to vote for Obama.
Well, then those people need to be informed as to what
it's an excuse is actually the best way to put it. It's an excuse, not a real reason.
Well, excuse is a fair characterization, but ask Black people how they fared, how we fared.
Oh yeah, worse.
I'm sure you
worse.
Way worse. So much Black wealth got erased in the housing crisis, and Obama chose to, through what quantitative easing through the Fed, chose to prop up the banks instead of propping up the people. And of course, Black people always being on the more vulnerable end of the economic scale suffered the hardest under that, and still have yet to recover. And so I mean anyway, that's something that drives me particularly crazy about Obama specifically, because he will always sort of use these like class signifiers, but especially in through the context of when he's talking to Black audiences about make sure you got to get Pookie out there to vote. And it's like, will you shut the fuck up about some fucking Pookie? Can't it ain't Pookie's fault that he can't vote because it costs too much to get an ID, because the fucking ballot machines are broke at Pookie's precinct. Like this, it's all this shaming of behaviors, especially towards the Black community, that Obama does, like I said, specifically, and Biden has somewhat by extension did that too during the campaign when he was like, you're not Black enough if you don't vote for Joe Biden. I'm like, who the fuck are you? Like,
that's the even that really
Biden become the arbiter of Blackness. Come on.
That really blew me out, because it's one thing for Barack Obama to say it. Like, it may be hypocritical and wrong on some levels, but it's also, listen, I'm white, I'm staying out of it. Okay.
Well,
but for Joe Biden has done the I have a Black friend on the greatest national scale now that anyone has ever. He's just like, yeah, remember when Obama and I were president? Yeah, so here's what the Black community needs to do. And you're just like, wow, you just really think that you can just say that now? Like, he really clearly believes that he's just allowed to do that, and it just blows my mind.
So let's keep in mind that Barack Obama, whatever else he was, is a guy who grew up in the suburbs, raised by his well-off, slightly racist white grandparents. And he inherited many of their views about the world.
Yep.
How could he not?
Exactly.
I mean, that's exactly what we were talking about earlier. I mean, that's the thing about white supremacy and racism. It's not, it doesn't just get taught to white people, right? Like, non-white people fully internalize a lot of shit of white supremacy. You know what I mean? From trying to alter our appearances to become more, Euro-friendly looking or appealing. Like, I mean, it manifests itself in a variety of ways. So absolutely, could Obama have interpreted some white supremacy? He did, clearly. Like, just in the way that he talks to Black people. It's very condescending. And I think a lot of Black Americans who held him up on a pedestal naturally as being the first, I think that people are becoming hip to that shit and becoming more critical of his record in retrospect, because I feel as though, he got a lot of undeserved allegiance from Black voters because, at the same, despite him talking shit to Black people, everybody understood what he was up against. You know what I mean? He was still a Black person in a predominant white institution, and the people had already made it clear they want him to succeed. So we understood that, but he still could have done. He could have done more. He could have said more, and his tone is not improved since he's left office.
Even if people never admit that they got snowed with Obama, they still have learned the lesson. And the example that I give of this is, how many delegates did Kamala Harris win?
before she dropped out.
Yeah, or Pete Buttigieg for that matter, because we all know Pete Buttigieg would just love to be the white Obama. Every speech he gives is an Obama speech chopped together, but you remove like the context words and you just kept the pretty words.
But yes, no, because both Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg were chosen by people who thought this is our Obama candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And Pete Buttigieg had some moments, but what really happened to Kamala Harris's candidacy?
Kamala. I mean, she was going to have a hard time winning over certain folks anyway. And then the optics of, she and Obama both being Black, but not Black American in their heritage it's slightly off-putting. You know what I mean? Because it's like, they wear their Blackness and weaponize it when it's time for campaigns and you want to go talk to the NAACP convention and start singing Al Green in the church. Like it works for that context, but they nor them nor their parents nor grandparents, there is a lot particular to the Black American experience. And I'm not one of those ADOS people. I don't agree with that at all. I definitely do not think that only Black American descendants of slavery are deserving of reparations. That to me is foolish. Like that's a preposterous thing to even suggest. But there is something to a sort of anti-Blackness and an anti-Black Americanness that comes across with some Black immigrant families.
Well, it's worth remembering that the reality of today's immigration system is, even if you're not rich by American standards after you get here, you have to be kind of rich by the standards of the country you're coming from to ever get to America in the first place if you're going to do it legally.
Yeah. I was going to say, especially legally, and especially we think of there's like a lot of stereotypes about like the immigrant business owner. Part of the reason why that exists is because that's who we let immigrate easily.
Yeah.
People who can afford to start businesses.
Right. Someone who can afford to move here and immediately buy a house, buy a business. I mean, that's not insignificant money at that point.
Absolutely.
It's true. And that's, and when you talk about the whole class thing, the rich people understand class better than any poor or middle class people.
Yes.
Because rich people are always there hanging together when it really matters.
Look at the Black bourgeoisie. I see that very clearly. Just look at all the stepping fetchits that would show up to perform for the candidates across the country. Oh my God,
And I mean, you've got the whole congressional bourgeois caucus. I mean,
oh my
that's
gosh.
not what I meant. But
yeah, I'm telling you guys, like the CBC only has stature amongst a very particular segment of Black folks, and I can assure you, it's not Black people under the age of 35. It's very much people who like James Clyburn, or who were supporters of Elijah Cummings or John Lewis. Like it's a church going, long time Democrat voting, baby boomer specific. You know what I mean? Like I think myself and younger than me that has no reverence for the.
Well, with John Lewis and Elijah Cummings, I mean, they were both legitimate civil rights icons once. And I mean, John Lewis was once the guy that people who were willing to let Martin Luther King speak were afraid of speaking because they thought he was too radical.
Yes.
So, I mean, there were reasons to be loyal to John Lewis and Elijah Cummings as people, if you were of a certain generation, that would be very hard to shake, even if they're not what we would consider materialist. And it's very hard to just abandon that, especially when someone has that kind of stature. Even James Clyburn has managed to appropriate a certain civil rights stature in South Carolina that other people did more to earn than he did.
Yeah, and I think Obama drapes himself heavily in that, or at least he did at that time. While Lewis and Cummings were still alive and still active in the House, like Obama leaned very heavily on the sacrifices of his forefathers in that respect, also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But
well, geez.
But I think that I think we should start to wrap up in a moment or two.
Yeah, I am getting this is an amazing conversation, so I haven't wanted to say it, but I am starting to get a little sleepy.
I understand.
Aren't you guys on Pacific Standard Time? Is it not 8:30 there?
I'm on Mountain Time, so it's actually 9:30 here, and also I am a boomer.
Well,
are you?
I am young, but I go to bed very early and get up very early.
Now,
to be fair, your face with if you are a boomer,
it should also be noted that for important personal reasons, Kennedy has given up caffeine.
Oh,
and
going. I usually take about 2 to 3 caffeine breaks a year. But I would like to be able to put it down permanently, but I have not.
Yeah, I mean, this has been like a 10-year journey, really, because like it was 10 years ago that I was like slugging espresso all day, and I had this revelation of like, wow, this is as hard as any drug I'm taking. And at the time, 10 years ago, I was snorting Vicodin, to just give you an example of like things that I was up to, I was like, wow, this is as hard as any drug that I'm taking, and I need to cut back. And so I started to cut back way back then, and then it's been this really slow journey to reach this point where now, for health reasons, it really makes sense for me to just quit entirely. I'm a lot healthier with my chronic conditions if I just manage to do this, but God, it's not the most fun. I'm on like week 3 now. It's getting a little easier.
Okay. I was gonna ask how long you've been at this. So 3 weeks. Yeah, I think you probably got a few more weeks to go.
I'm thinking it's gonna be 3 months before the cravings really go away.
Sometimes you can fool yourself with herbal tea, I have heard.
Green tea.
Green tea is still caffeinated. Herbal tea it doesn't have actual tea in it, so it's not actually caffeinated.
Oh, so it's all caffeine, not just caffeine from coffee.
Oh yeah, no, I've quit all caffeine.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Listen, the legal drugs are the hardest ones to quit. Are they not? The nicotine, the alcohol, the caffeine.
That's why they're legal, right?
in the sense of how it changes the way your body works and how hard it is to quit, caffeine is up there with heroin.
Absolutely. As is nicotine or cigarettes, American cigarettes anyway.
Yeah. I haven't done heroin, but I've done other opiates. I've done hardcore uppers. I've smoked cigarettes. I've been a binge drinker. Every single thing has been easier to quit than caffeine, other than I assume weed, because if I have to quit weed, I'm done, y'all. It's
The good news is that there, with the exception of being allergic to weed, there is no medical condition that weed makes worse. And there are some that it actually makes better.
That's right.
But honestly, because I am a chronic marijuana smoker, that is in part has fueled my rational fear of COVID. Like I have marijuana smoker's lungs. Like what happens if COVID gets me? It's gonna fuck me up probably, right? Like so. I can't quit smoking weed, so I just have to avoid civilization.
I I do kind of agree with that rationale. Honestly, some of mine has been similar, but I will actually say there was a study that said that we weed smokers might be a little bit safer. So,
Really?
yeah.
That's an interesting study.
Who funded the study? High Times magazine?
No, it was. I'm trying to remember now. It was a while ago, unfortunately, but it was a very legitimate. It hasn't been repeated yet, but it was a pretty legitimate, reputable study, and it was, people who, because also they found something slightly similar with cigarette smokers to some extent. If you were a cigarette smoker, you were in some ways safer against coronavirus than non-smokers in some ways, not in every way. But it was like, yeah, your lungs are used to functioning on like half capacity of oxygen after you take that huge hit, and you're just coughing for a freaking hour.
It must be that the virus cannot hook itself to your lungs because of all the tar that is already currently sitting.
Right? Yeah.
Like it can't burrow past the tar layer.
Yeah, actually, this will be my final thought for the night. There's a wonderful TV show that everyone should watch called Danger 5. It's a very ridiculous, absurd Australian TV show about if World War II happened in the 60s and was full of partying and spies and just general nonsense. And it's a wonderful time. But there's one scene in particular where this guy has these special cigarettes that are military issued and prevent him from being gassed to death. And that's us with the COVID and the weed. Okay, you can't convince me otherwise.
I will take it.
I had intended to mention this sooner, but I'll put it out there as my final thought. The Build Back Better Act appears to be gone.
Oh, right.
The cable news people aren't really talking about it anymore. There was a tweet the other day from a progressive that made it sound like they were moving on to the next thing. And it just, yeah. So I don't think we're even going to get the cut down version of the Build Back Better Act that they left themselves with to placate Manchin, unless they somehow pull some sort of midterm miracle to not lose the election. But I don't see that happening.
Yes, the Democrats have brilliantly negotiated down from a bill with some great things in it that Republicans wouldn't vote for to a bill with nothing good in it that Republicans won't vote for.
And what's hilarious about this is that all these Biden people came in saying, "Don't worry, we're not going to repeat the Obama administration's mistakes. We won't trust the Republicans." No, the Obama administration's mistake was trusting Ben Nelson. You guys trust Joe Manchin.
So let me make my final thought, piggybacking off what you said, Chris, in regards to Build Back Better. Today, Vice President Kamala Harris was in my neck of the woods in Prince George's County, Maryland. She was touring some facility connected to the construction or the development of the technology with these electric car charging stations, which the Biden administration is touting as, one of the hallmarks of this Build Back Better bill. I imagine as a pittance to help stymie climate change, while Joe Biden is trying to make sure that we get all these electric cars on the road. The Biden administration has been approving new drilling projects at a higher rate than the Trump administration was. These are oil and gas drilling projects and exploratory projects. And it just goes to show you that still the Democrats remain deeply unserious about doing anything substantive to address climate change.
And they lied about it.
Right. I mean, but
we were
cars. If you are still going to continue to frack, if you're still going to continue to construct oil pipelines that go through drinking water areas, and especially areas that have already been violated by treaty with sovereign indigenous nations, and putting needs of fuck all corporations like Trans Canada above the real environmental needs of this country. So Democrats are still faking the funk, and I don't know if we have a lot of hope, because there's no political party that is on the side of climate change. They all just fund FEMA when the weather catastrophe comes through, but they don't want to do the things that could possibly try to mitigate all this shit.
There are limits to what I can say, but the only thing I can say is, even with constitutional reform, Russia was never going to vote the czar out. We are never going to solve some of the problems that we're facing right now by voting.
Yes, I agree with that.
And I think that's a good place for us to end for the night, because that's something we can all agree on.
Absolutely.
On that note, folks, you guys all have a great night. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for having me back.
It's such a pleasure. You're a delight, and it's so wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for agreeing.
Thank you, Kennedy, and thank you, Chris. Thank you guys for the invitation.
We love having you. In a perfect world, we would have you and or Elias Cepeda on every Monday. So.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what the future holds. Let's put it that way.
We definitely enjoy having you with us.
Thank you, guys.
And follow Kim at Kim Brown Live and at Burn It Down KB.
Yes, that's the show tomorrow. Oh man, my show tomorrow is going to be interesting. I'll just be real quick. Burn It Down with Kim Brown channel. Find it, subscribe to it if you haven't already. Northern Witch, I already know that you were down with the team. But tomorrow's show, we're going to be talking about the kind of somewhat disgusting undercurrent that came from certain sections of social media, looking down at the people who had suffered tremendous losses during the Kentucky, Midwest tornado outbreak. Like, oh, well, I guess you guys should have voted Democrat, huh? Like, no, that's a terrible thing to say. Also, the FBI is going to stop collecting police shooting and police brutality and violence information, because most local police municipalities are not being cooperative and turning over the information. So the federal government's just going to stop collecting this information anyway. So and we have a lot of things to get to. And there was a really terrible domestic violence incident that happened here in Maryland that I actually knew the person who committed this horrible act. They killed their ex-wife, killed their ex-girlfriend, and then killed themselves. And I went to high school with this guy. So we're going to have a discussion about the way that domestic violence and people having mental health crises, and how we really just have to change entirely the way we look at this. Because Maryland is a state that has extremely strict gun laws. So legislative efforts to try to keep a gun out of this man's hand would not have worked, because gun laws don't fucking work, because that's the stupid way to approach this. So I'm sorry.
Plus, no, I'm the one cutting you off. The one person I knew who did the same thing was, I worked in a call center. It was a mill. It was a sweatshop. There were at least 2 people who committed murders while I was working there. The one person poisoned their kid.
Shit.
That was gross. The other person, though, and this just proves that even gun control wouldn't stop everything. The other person went looking for their ex and their kid with a bow and arrow, and using the bow and arrow, killed their ex and their kid, and then shot themselves with a gun.
Oh, wow. Yeah. There has to be a better way. You know what I mean? Like I sometimes will go on anti-man rants on occasion on my program, but there has to be a way for men specifically who are overwhelmingly the perpetrators of these crimes, who murder women and children in acts of domestic violence. There has to be a way for men to be able to seek and receive crisis intervention kind of help. Like if a man is feeling like I'm about to fucking kill this bitch, like there has to be something that someone that he can call that will try to diffuse the situation without maybe institutionalizing them. You know what I mean? Like there has to be a medium to this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There and I hate to be I hate to sound like I'm standing up for men too much, because there's a lot of stuff men get away with.
But men need help out here.
But you're right.
Because they're killing us. Right?
Well, we are, I mean, men are taught to look at life a certain way and to bear up under life a certain way. And if you don't do this, then you're not really a man. And there's all sorts of toxic crap that goes into that. Yeah. Above and beyond all the stuff that people think of as toxic masculinity, the idea that is beaten into men that they have to be able to support their families by themselves, and if they don't, they're a failure. Mm-hmm. That's tremendously toxic just by itself, and people don't refer to that as toxic at all.
Yeah. Well, I will be looking forward to tuning into that, because I think that's an important conversation for sure. It's really critical.
I mean, it's extremely sad, and it's like somebody, and I won't say that I was friends with this person, but I knew them all 4 years of high school and even a couple of years afterwards. So, when someone you're acquainted with or you had proximity to at some point, does something very extremely heinous, like it's so shocking. It's like I can't even believe that this happened, and then you understand when people be like, I never thought that this person was capable of anything like this. Well, they were, and I'd like to sort of examine like what got him to this point. I mean, it's fuck him tragically because of what he did, but part of me has empathy for him because I just don't see how he arrived here. You know what I mean?
My real final thought. Right. This will really be my final thought, and then I'll take us off the air. But my real final thought is that we are all more capable of that than we would like to admit.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yep.
But there has to be another way, because people be like, oh, it's the access to guns. Listen, there's 400 million guns in this fucking country. Everyone could have 2 to 3 to 10 guns a piece if it came down to it. So we have to honestly take that off the table, because logistically there's no way to get 400 million guns off the street. And we need to be honest.
Well, and that's something that I have thought about a lot. And so every time I think about it, it goes the same way. It's, well, okay, you're banning guns. So how are you going to get the guns?
Right. Guess what?
Okay, well, that means cops, which means putting cops in contact with people with guns, which means gunfights.
Right.
Great. Yeah, perfect.
That's all we need. More cops getting into gunfights.
No, none of that, please.
Yeah, none of this works. None of this works, but.
And you can say all you want. Well, who cares? Whichever side wins, it comes out in our favor. And then it becomes no. Because even though rich white people own most of the guns, that is not who cops enforce gun laws against.
No.
Nope.
Nope. So we're gonna have to find another way. Well, we will have to save the topic of gun control for another time.
Yes, we will. And everybody have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you both. I will. Thank you guys. Thank y'all.
Thank you. And we'll tweet at you, folks.